Yeah, I just started the Zoom broadcast and TV, we're ready to go live.
Okay, great. Welcome to the City of Pacifica City Council special meeting of November 17th. It is 6 p.m. and call this meeting to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Councilmember O'Neill.
Here.
Councilmember Beer.
Here.
Councilmember Vaterlos.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Beckmeyer.
Here.
Mayor Martin.
Here. And we will have the salute to the flag led by Councilmember Vaterlos.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it
stands,
stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Great,
Mayor
thank
Martin,
you.
if you allow, I'll make a few comments about the meeting format for tonight.
Please, thank you.
This meeting is being held by video conference with no physical location open to the public. The public can observe and participate in the meeting via the Zoom link provided in the agenda or by phone to the dial-in number and webinar ID provided in the agenda. The meeting may be also observed live on local TV channel 26 or online at www.cityofpacifica.org/live-stream. For this meeting, live verbal public comments only on the agendized item for this special meeting may be made through participation by Zoom. For members of the public participating via Zoom, use the raise hand button to indicate that you wish to speak on the agenda item when the mayor calls upon public comment on the item. For those participating by phone, use *9 or *9 to raise your hand to request to speak. The city clerk will call upon speakers at the appropriate time and unmute you to talk after calling you by your Zoom screen name or the last 4 digits of your phone number if you're dialing in. Please clearly state your full name for the record at the start of your public comment. Written and email public comments will not be read during the meeting, but will be made part of the written record and were provided to council members if received by 3:00 p.m. today. The format of this meeting may be altered or the meeting may be canceled if needed. You may check on the status of the meeting by visiting the city's website at cityofpacifica.org.
Thank you, Clerk Coffey. Okay, so this evening, our special meeting, we were talking about Sharp Park specific plan update and City Council direction on preferred land use strategies to guide preparation of a draft Sharp Park specific plan. So with that, I will hand it over to city staff for a report.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council members. I am Associate Planner Bonnie O'Connor. I am joined this evening by the Plan Pacifica team, including Planning Director Tina Wehrmeister, and our consultant team from Diet and Bhatia, Allison Moore and Rajiv Bhatia. I will also welcome Planning Commissioner Tiger Jazz Big Stick, who is the Planning Commission liaison for this item. As you will recall, at Council's meeting on September 29th, staff presented a similar report on the progress of the Sharp Park specific plan and sought feedback from the Council on the guiding policy framework. At that meeting, the Council directed staff to provide further detailed visualizations to better inform the public and the Council's feedback on these policies. In response, Diet and Bhatia worked to develop 3 examples of potential development that could occur along Palmetto Avenue, as supported by the drafted guiding policy framework. These visualizations were distributed for public and council consideration, and now staff is returning to continue the discussion of the Sharp Park specific plan. Allison will make more of a detailed presentation in a moment, including discussion on the visualizations and the public feedback received. But before that, I would like to briefly revisit staff's goals for tonight's meeting. First, we are seeking confirmation of the guiding policy framework for the Sharp Park specific plan. You can find the guiding policy framework starting on packet page 17. In particular, we need your feedback on issues related to mixed use land use designations and housing density, building heights as it relates to housing density, and bicycle and pedestrian connections to enhance mobility in the Sharp Park area. These are topics that are critical to the plan's development, but for which the community has provided mixed feedback during our public engagement process. The Planning Commission has taken a first pass at providing some clarity on these issues, but it will be important for the council to give clear direction as to how these topics should be addressed in the draft plan staff will be preparing. Additionally, as a reminder, tonight's action is not an approval of the Sharp Park specific plan. Rather, it is a confirmation of the key planning framework, which will guide staff in preparing a host of more detailed policies, which will comprise the draft plan. Further community engagement and discussion on the draft plan will occur, and it will be possible for the council to make changes to the draft plan before it is adopted. So with that introduction, I'll turn the presentation over to Allison Moore.
Thanks, Bonnie. I think my camera doesn't seem to be activated. But I can just go ahead. So thanks so much for that introduction, and good evening, council members. Much of the information in tonight's presentation you will have seen before, but there will be some new things, namely the visualizations. But as a refresher and to debrief those members of the public who couldn't attend last time, if you could go to the next slide, please. I'll be going over the background and the context of the plan, describe community outreach, and then get into the guiding policies for which we respectfully request your guidance on a few policy issues tonight. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try and stop my video and try again. There we go. Okay. So if we could go to the next slide. And the next. So the Sharp Parks neighborhood has been identified as an area with potential for evolution and growing vibrancy over the next several decades, and it's envisioned as a major community center for Pacifica. The council has long recognized the potential of Palmetto Avenue to become a vibrant corridor, and the Sharp Park specific plan builds on improvements that have already been made as part of this Palmetto Streetscape project. The area is an important place both for the city and for the region. Sharp Park has been adopted as a priority growth area by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and this means that there is that recognized potential for infill development within the existing community, primed for a pedestrian and bicycle-friendly environment. And the opportunity to create a Sharp Park with enhanced vibrancy through mixed use and additional housing is also a crucial piece in addressing the city's legal obligation to plan for its regional housing allocation, which specifies how many new homes Pacifica and other cities need to build and how affordable those homes need to be in order to meet the housing needs of people of all income levels. So what does a specific plan do? The short version is it helps us define what the community wants, and it makes it easier to achieve. It does this by providing clear guidelines and policies. And this guidance can help make development more feasible by providing more certainty about what can be built, what it must look like, and what the opportunities and constraints are in the plan area. The Sharp Park specific plan will also be consistent with the general plan and local coastal program updates, and will also undergo environmental review. And certification of all these plans and the specific plan also helps to reduce developers' costs, because certain projects that comply will not have to undergo as extensive of an environmental review process. Next slide. So we've wrapped up the visioning and issue identification phase of this process to establish that foundation for the plan's goals. And now we are nearing the end of phase 2, where we sought to explore preferences and trade-offs for land use, connectivity, and urban design strategies to achieve the vision. These preferred strategies have been incorporated into the draft guiding policy framework, which provides the general direction for more detailed specific plan policies and their implementing actions later on. Next slide. So there's been robust public engagement so far over multiple channels, including 5 neighborhood visioning meetings in July of last year, focused discussions with Sharp Park nonprofits, residents, developers, and businesses, as well as an online existing conditions survey. And there have been 4 major public outreach initiatives in the second phase, The concepts workshop held in January, where we had over 120 people attending. An online concepts survey, which received over 350 responses. A public learning session last August, which had 45 participants virtually. And then this next phase was the Sharp Park visualization outreach, which I'll talk about in more detail in a little bit. Next slide. So at the concepts workshop, the public considered concepts to achieve the 3 major goals of the plan, and those are increasing vibrancy, supporting placemaking, and improving connectivity. Next slide. And while we had some consensus on some issues at the workshop, there were some issues of mixed opinion. And the online concept survey really sought to quantify what people thought about those mixed opinion areas. And that included appropriate heights and densities and the location of an appropriate east-west bike or pedestrian connection to enhance. And then in August, the online learning session sought to provide more information on the plan's goals and introduce the guiding policy framework, as well as answer any questions about the process. Next slide. So the latest outreach effort came from council direction to visualize what development could look like at various densities and heights from the pedestrian point of view. And we created visualizations for 3 vacant sites, 2 at heights of 50 feet and 1 at 45 feet. If you go to the next slide, you can see the 3 sites. And a mixed-use center and mixed-use neighborhood densities, though I do want to note that because site 3 is so large and we did want to show height at 45 feet, it's at a little bit of a higher density, though the density is in line with the mixed-use neighborhood with a density bonus. And I just want to note that these visualizations are not development plans, they're not guarantees, they're not definitive standards, nor are they intended to represent the only way that development or architectural details could occur, but effort was really made to highlight design techniques that could be considered and provide rationale for density and height decisions that support the stated community goal of a more vibrant Palmetto. Next slide. So over the course of a week, there was significant effort made to share these visualizations through multiple channels. We received over 30 comments by email or through the website comment form, 50 reactions and 19 comments through social media, and a very high level of website traffic. Excited to say that it was the most in the Plan Pacifica project web page's history. Next slide. And then for the most part, people who left discernible comments were quite supportive of the visualizations. They praised mixed use and called out some of the design techniques that they liked, that they thought would contribute to more vibrancy. Several people applauded the idea of adding street trees, which is a decision point we're hoping to discuss tonight. There were some lingering concerns about height, particularly the impacts to coastal views. You can see on site 3 on Santa Maria that we did try to show how development would not impact views from the street towards the ocean. Concerns about impacts to adjacent residences and effects on neighborhood character. And then some expressed desire for more commercial square footage than residential units, while others recognized the link between commercial and residential and were supportive of more housing, both to address Pacifica's housing need and to support businesses. Concerns about sea level rise were reiterated, and then a few other commenters expressed desire for affordable units and concerns about displacement. And as I'll discuss later, it's a major goal of the plan to provide more housing at all income levels and create opportunities to support affordable housing development. Next slide. So with those ideas in mind and with those reactions to the visualizations, what we're talking about tonight is the guiding policy framework, which supports development shown in those visualizations. The guiding policy framework takes on public feedback and decision maker direction to date and lays out the key strategies that will inform development of more specific guiding and implementing policies later on. Next slide. So there are 3 parts to the guiding policy framework. The first chunk is the vision statement and guiding principles. You can see a snippet of the vision statement here. The guiding policies themselves, and then the implementing policies. So next slide, please. The guiding policies are the city's statements of broad direction, philosophy, or standards to be achieved. And then the implementing policies are the specific statements on how those guiding policies will be achieved. And while the main ideas and spirit captured in the policy framework will not change, the document will evolve, and you will have opportunity to comment on the specific plan at a later date. And several of the policies to be developed will be done so through technical analysis, especially parking, coastal resilience, and urban design policies. But a lot of those policies we're hoping to develop, we kind of need clarity on the basic land use concepts before those technical analyses can proceed. So with that, I'm just going to share a bit more background information on some of the topics and the concepts to inform tonight's discussion. Next slide. The first is land use. Next slide. So one of the most important guiding principles within this framework is creating a vibrant mix of uses along Palmetto Avenue. Guiding principles for land use focus on creating a critical mass of people, uses, and amenities, all of which mutually depend on each other for their success. So more residents can mean a bigger customer base for local restaurants, shops, and entertainment. This can help to create that 24-hour activity. That's kind of the hallmark of a vibrant, active destination. And then that focused critical mass is desired along the north-south corridors of Palmetto and Francisco, so as to preserve the character of smaller scale residential neighborhoods that are adjacent. And then I'd mentioned this before, but the plan seeks to really promote development of housing that accommodates residents of all income levels in what will become an increasingly amenity-rich environment. Next slide. So two of the key policy areas to achieve that vibrancy, that mix of people and foot traffic and businesses that create a vibrant place and create the critical mass include consideration of a more intense land use. Intense meaning more housing units that could be built and more square footage for commercial businesses along some part of Palmetto, and where that is, we'll talk about tonight. And an adjusted height limit in some areas to accommodate that intensity. Because that height limit is needed for certain land use designations to reach that density. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Next slide. So as part of the local coastal land use plan certification draft, there are two mixed land use designations for consideration. The mixed use neighborhood designation and then the mixed use center designation. And the difference is that mixed use center would allow for more housing units and more commercial space to be built on a parcel than mixed use neighborhood. However, to achieve this development potential, mixed use center requires heights over 35 feet, which is the current height limit for the city. And then of course, other factors would determine what buildings look like and what their full unit capacity would be. Including parking, the type of commercial development and the unit size, and then any other design requirements. So this rendering here, which was presented in the online visioning survey, shows that difference on a 0.3 acre site. We can see that a mixed use center designation results in approximately twice the number of housing units and about 700 square feet more of commercial space. And it's expected that these units would be a mix of studios and 1 and 2 bedrooms, though there could be some room for units to support families and larger household sizes. But I did want to note that naturally smaller units can help promote housing that is more affordable, affordable by design. And I also want to note that in some mixed use projects, it's the residential that subsidizes the cost of commercial. So more housing units can help us get to that stated preference for more commercial development. And through the online survey, we had heard that people were kind of split between mixed use center versus mixed use neighborhood along Palmetto. Though when you added up the people who supported mixed use center for all of Palmetto and then south of Palmetto, some portion of Palmetto, that was over 50%. And then the Planning Commission supported increased intensity south of San Jose, and then had some mixed opinions about what would happen in northern Palmetto because of height considerations. And I'll talk about that height divide, like the south and northern Palmetto divide next. So next slide. The next policy concept to promote vibrancy is height. As I mentioned, the height limit's 35 feet. And to fully achieve development potential, most properties with a mixed-use center designation require a minimum height of 4 stories, 45 feet. So as such, height is an important component in increasing vibrancy and activity. It's a tool to make multifamily and affordable housing types more feasible. And what we found as we were developing the visualizations is that most often the mixed-use center density of 50 dwelling units per acre is usually achieved in 4 stories. However, taller heights of up to 55 can give flexibility to play around with roof lines, with space for rooftop gardens or activated upper floors, dining, or it can help to free up room for outdoor seating or dining at the ground level. So Francisco Boulevard, the 2212 Beach Boulevard site, and the Eureka Square complex are proposed as areas with a mixed-use center designation in the current local coastal land use plan. For decisions about land use and height along Palmetto, we are calling San Jose the dividing line, and that is because there's about a 10-foot elevation difference from north of San Jose and south of San Jose, with north of San Jose being slightly taller. And then San Jose also provides a crucial pedestrian east-west connection. It's also close to proposed city projects, so more vibrancy in the south could make sense. And then what we've heard from the online survey, referring back to that, is that the public is supportive of heights over 35 feet along Palmetto. And the Planning Commission was as well. Next slide. So we had heard from the Planning Commission that they would be interested in offering additional density or height in northern Palmetto as an incentive for developing affordable housing, or for development that offers some other features that would be a benefit to the community. And so as of now, state density bonus only applies to projects with 5 or more units, and Pacifica's local ordinance is 15% inclusionary for projects of 8 or more units. And so projects below 5 or more units are not required to provide affordable housing. So there's a gap there. There's a gap between the inclusionary zoning and the below market rate ordinance. So this represents a potential opportunity in this plan with the right planning policies and densities to create the space where smaller projects may be able or incentivized to provide affordable housing. And these sites on the map shown on the right are sites that are around 7,000 square feet and would hit that sweet spot of 5 or less units. Next slide. So as we have been continually analyzing the plan area, we found that several parcels are already at higher existing densities than their local coastal land use plan density currently is. And when the existing density is higher than what would be allowed, this can create a disincentive to redevelop. However, a mixed-use center designation could offer a higher ceiling and thus more of an incentive. So here on this map, we can see that several parcels in northern Palmetto are already bumping up against that and exceeding that 26 units per acre. And then to further promote affordable housing opportunities in areas where higher density already exists, especially with residential land uses, not just, we've mainly been focusing on mixed use, but if we're focusing in on those higher density residential land uses, an additional land use category could be developed. We could call it affordable plus, that would have slightly higher densities than that 16 to 21 dwelling units per acre for high density residential, perhaps in line with residential densities associated with mixed use center. And there I'm talking about those brownish areas in the southern part of the planning area. Next slide. And while most of the focus thus far has been on Palmetto, staff has also been thinking about the ways that Francisco Boulevard can support Palmetto as the main retail street while capitalizing on Francisco's location as the gateway to Sharp Park. So from Carmel to north of Paloma, we've been considering a mixed-use neighborhood designation. And the vision there would be a flexible, smaller scale residential mixed use that includes retail. And the thinking is that an increase in residential mixed use would help to provide the foot traffic to Palmetto and serve as the gateway. Palmetto is also one of the streets prioritized for an improved east-west bicycle pedestrian connection. And then south from there, Carmel to Montecito, we feel a mixed-use center designation would be appropriate. And the vision for that is higher density residential with ground floor flexible use or flexible office space. Retail would be allowed, but not encouraged as not to detract from Palmetto. Or it could be visitor serving uses like hotels or motels. And the flexible ground floor idea comes from the idea that we want to be flexible in response to economic trends, especially with office and with COVID. And then south of that, Montecito to Clarendon, we would retain the same land use designations as it is mainly residential. And then the only other change on Francisco would be those two retail, they were retail commercial parcels before. It's a 7-Eleven and another parcel down here. We would change that to mixed use center to allow for more of a housing opportunity, which would fit with the higher density residential pattern just to the west of that. And then for land uses east of Highway 1, it's been noted that Eureka may not be as likely to redevelop in the near future after the facade improvements that have recently been undertaken. But we do want to be prepared for if the time were to come. And so we have changed what was an adjoining office parcel to mixed use center to maximize that redevelopment potential. And then parcels east of Francisco, just to the north of Eureka, we feel a mixed use neighborhood designation would be appropriate, but with potential policies that support historic rehabilitation or preservation. We do know that there's a historically significant parcel in that area. Next slide. So mobility. Sharp Park's mobility network is envisioned to become one where people feel safe and comfortable moving around the neighborhood and getting to and from where they live, work, and spend time in the manner that they so choose. Next slide. A complete mobility network will include welcoming and safe ways for cars, bicycles, and pedestrians to move around. And several areas in Sharp Park have already seen connectivity improvements, the improvements along Palmetto and along the promenade. However, there are still areas where sidewalks are in poor condition, they may be incomplete, crosswalks may not be well defined. And we feel some ways to improve the experience might be to complete the sidewalks, improve the lighting, include policies to support better wayfinding, such as how to get to the pier from Francisco, from the berm to Maury Point, things like that. And though the plan will emphasize less of a dependence on cars, which can improve bike and pedestrian safety and reduce greenhouse gases, we recognize that this is a longer term process and that some people will always need cars. And as such, there's still a need to maintain adequate parking while balancing the trade-offs that provision of that parking brings. Next slide. Cover those. Next slide. So since Sharp Park has relatively good north-south connections, the focus for us has been to try and find ways to improve east-west connections to link the Francisco Gateway, the vibrant commercial activity along Palmetto, and then the promenade and the beach. So public outreach to date has not really identified a strong preference yet for one east-west corridor over the other. The Planning Commission recommended improved bike and pedestrian corridors along Paloma and Clarendon in the north and south end, and then a pedestrian connection that aligns with the pedestrian overcrossing at San Jose. Next slide. So in line with that recommendation, staff is recommending prioritization of the north, south, and central corridor to maximize walkability throughout the plan area, with Clarendon focused on, Clarendon prioritized first as the bike pedestrian connection, then San Jose as a pedestrian connection, and then Paloma. And each presents their own benefits and constraints. Next slide. And then in terms of parking, we did conduct a parking study long before COVID to understand how much parking is being used and where. And this baseline will be helpful as we consider where parking facilities should be located. And then we'll also consider how other strategies like time limits, residential permits, and other strategies should be used. Next slide. And the next one. So placemaking is the next topic area. We've heard from the community that high quality design and preservation of ocean views and atmosphere are of utmost importance. Some of the main guiding principles for Sharp Park include a vision for complete neighborhoods with activities and places that support social connectedness and well-being. The guiding policies seek to promote clear development standards and design guidelines that define what shape development takes and what it looks like. And policies will clearly define how new neighborhood development in the higher intensity mixed use corridors will interface with the smaller scale neighborhoods. And one of the biggest tasks and top of mind for many people is figuring out how to accommodate that new development that creates critical mass and vibrancy that is also compatible with existing structures. The development needs to respect residential neighborhoods and connections to the sky, hills, and sea that are beloved by many, and then also contribute to an enhanced character in Sharp Park. Next slide. So some of the most important design considerations will need to include guidance on things like how far buildings have to be set back from existing structures or from the street, roof lines or step downs to transition from taller to shorter buildings and avoid blocking any public views, daylight plane calculations that prevent shadow, eliminating blank walls or including elements like murals or green walls, standards on ground floor transparency, among others. And you may have seen in some of the visualizations that we tried to incorporate them into what the buildings look like and then explain what each of those design features contribute. And then another consideration is exploration of options to expand street trees, especially given constrained right-of-way considerations. As part of the visualization feedback from the public, and then at other community engagement events as well, the importance of trees has been stressed, and we're seeking guidance on whether trees in the public right-of-way should be an option to explore. Next slide. Next slide. And then coastal resources and resilience is the last one, another important topic area for many community members. Next slide. So much of Sharp Park's character is drawn from the ocean. Proximity to the ocean provides Sharp Park with several opportunities to recreate, to enjoy, but it also presents challenges as well. The specific plan will acknowledge that Sharp Park is vulnerable to coastal hazards, and policies will support the Coastal Commission's goals and strive to maximize benefits to public access, recreation, and employment, while also protecting investments in areas that may be subject to coastal erosion, wave up overtopping, and other coastal hazards. And rather than reinvent the wheel, the specific plan seeks to rely on work already performed as part of the local coastal land use plan and the vulnerability assessment to guide Sharp Park's approach to resilience. That extensive public process, which considered sea level rise adaptation strategies as part of the local coastal land use plan development, which was approved by council in February, resulted in the development of really robust policies for the city's coastal zone, including sub-area policies for the Sharp Park area. The specific plan also recognizes the city's efforts and importance of the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project, which is occurring simultaneously. And the planning team is closely coordinating with these developments as well. So this will be taken into account. Next slide. And the next slide. Sorry, I've been lax in shepherding you along. Next slide. So with that information, we are seeking your guidance on several items this evening. And I know that was a lot to go through, so we're more than happy to flip back to any of the other slides and answer questions about any of the sections as we discuss some of these points. So I'll turn that over to Bonnie to get us started on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Allison. So staff looks forward to hearing the public comments this evening and fielding questions from the council on this item. We have provided an outline of the key discussion points to help council get started. And those are available on pages 13 and 14 of your packet. Thank you so much.
Okay. Does council want to ask a few questions? Because I have a few questions. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Did I miss the part where you talk about trees or landscape, or is that?
Yep. So if we go to in the urban design section, let me just find the right slide to bring us back to. Slide 33. Or slide 32, rather. So there, what we're seeking guidance on is to what extent we should be exploring options to be adding trees to the public right-of-way and within private development as well. And here we can see a couple options. There's tree wells here. Trees could be in planters, or for something more permanent, the option to the far right, which is what was shown in the visualizations, are trees that take up a small portion of a parking space. And that was what was included in the visualizations, and something that had a pretty significant positive reaction as part of community response.
Okay, thank you. Mary, did you have your hand up?
I have a few questions, but I'll start with this one. Is there a map of the historical parcels?
In this existing conditions report, there is.
There is.
And that is available on the project website.
Okay, yeah, I think that's actually really important for us to be looking at. Maybe I'll look it up right now on my other screen here. And then you said something about when you were talking about Santa Maria to Montecito and discouraging retail. Did I catch that correctly? And why is that?
Yes, so that is a decision that we've been considering along Francisco. And so the rationale there is that we don't want to encourage a ton of retail along Francisco because we don't want to detract from the critical mass that we're aiming to create on Palmetto. And sometimes when you put retail everywhere, it can reduce the amount of foot traffic. And so we really want to make sure that Palmetto is the main commercial street in the planning area. And while it wouldn't be it would be allowed, but it wouldn't be encouraged is the language that we're using. It's not to say that it wouldn't be allowed.
Because it seems to me that there's already retail on Francisco, right, and they're doing, they're doing all right. And so to discourage foot traffic there would mean we're discouraging folks from going to those businesses. So I have a concern about that. And so we're talking about height tonight, not density, correct?
We are talking about both height and density.
Okay. And okay, I'll stop for now. I know I have more, but I'll let my co-counsel speak.
Mayor Pro Tem Beckman?
I wanted to see if you could bring us back to the slide near the end that showed, I didn't catch it, it kind of flew by pretty fast, but it had a lot of yellow on it and it had some denotations about single family residences.
Yep, so I think you're talking about slide 37, and that map is from the local coastal land use plan. That represents the mapping that was done as part of that effort.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mike, sorry.
No problem. Did you call me or Sue?
Mike, yeah, sorry.
Okay. I'm going to switch to my notes from the presentation, so I'll be on word here. One thing I had explored with Christian was looking at rezoning the airspace of Eureka Square, not the retail at the bottom, but the space above into residential, to try to meet the RENA numbers. Is that something that is plausible, feasible, marketable, or staff would need to come back and think about it a while? Because it just seems to me that if a developer has the ability to kind of like just buy that part of the airspace, they could then put up, maybe 150 rental units of some sort, or maybe even affordable housing because they're only buying airspace instead of land. Is that something that we could look at? Oh,
so yeah, what I would say to that is that the mixed use center, which is recommended designation, which is recommended for Eureka Square, it does allow for greater densities above commercial. So it's not precluding your idea, your vision there. I think the concept of just buying. So usually a condo project is developed from the ground up by a single developer, and right. You're suggesting a different concept, which I think is a novel approach. And so I don't see that our zoning suggestion would preclude that. It's really we would need to learn more about how that works in terms of the subdivision and how the entitlements would work and selling the property. But in terms of density, that is it's not inconsistent with what you're saying, I guess is what.
Well, what it is it would be a variation of what this Peninsula Open Space Trust has done in a lot of the farmland south of the slide. What they did is they had the farmers that have all the open space, right? But they're cash poor and they're trying to, eke a living out in the farming. What Peninsula Open Space Trust did was buy the development rights, which gave the farmer cash, but then the farmer was able to keep it as open space. So this is basically, land that's owned by the Eureka Square owners, but would give them some cash to take and us the ability to actually maybe get another 100, 150 units in an infill section.
I see.
Okay, so it's basically kind of a takeoff of what the Peninsula. So the practice has already been there, just a different, flavor type of thing.
So you're suggesting density transfer.
Well, so no, not necessarily density transfer. It would be, because they're not transferring the density to another parcel anywhere. Right? I mean, they're developer ABC comes in and wants to buy the airspace above Eureka Square to build condos only. And I'm just thinking it might be more feasible for someone to come in and buy airspace there versus, to do it. I can see where you're coming from, that the zoning you're proposing allows it. But what I'm looking at is, it would make it more marketable saying, hey, this airspace is already zoned for residential, irregardless of this. And I'm just like, I would like to have that explored, because that could be, 100 units or 150 units up there, which would increase our ability to get more public transportation down there, priority development areas, and do it in infill places.
Okay, we can explore that more.
Okay. Another question, and this is kind of along the same lines of what Mary said, is there any way we could consider San Francisco? They have the Barbary Coast Trail where you can walk along, and there's medallions in the actual sidewalk of historical things. And I was think that might be kind of nice, because we have labeled that as a historical district. It would just be kind of nice to have those locations. Another thing I was thinking is, is it possible, like, let's say the council gives direction for a 45-foot height limit at the south end, okay? Is it possible to give some sort of density bonus or height bonus to, let's say, 55, if they create a public plaza down below, so that you can have maybe a Christmas tree lighting ceremony or some event there, so that you wouldn't need to close off Palmetto Avenue? So basically kind of a height bonus, which would give them maybe 1 or 2 more units, but would give the public more airspace and public space on the ground level.
So I think that if that is a policy that the council wants to pursue, we can certainly work that sort of incentive into the program. And I'm looking at Allison's nodding her head. So yeah, I think we can certainly do that.
Yeah,
okay,
that's right.
I don't know if there's support for that or not. So
just so I'm clear, the idea is to create public open space, right? It wouldn't be just open space for the residents of that private property. Is that
right? It would be deeded public open space to the city of Pacifica and I'm not talking for like a playground. I'm talking like just benches, maybe a fountain, flagpole, something like that. Like let's say you could, like Rockaway Plaza, they have that Christmas tree lighting ceremony. You could go have a Christmas tree lighting ceremony on Palmetto. That type of thing. Not huge, but just dedicated open space, deeded. And then they get a bonus of another 10 feet or whatever we decide.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable and something that we could explore, just kind of outlining what community benefits would be appropriate for that height or density bonus.
I think that's something the Coastal Commission wants too, is public access, public open space, which would maybe help us get a higher density there. I have more questions, but I don't want to hog the time, so.
Okay. Well, you know what? I want to make sure that Sue gets a chance to talk, right? And then I think maybe if you guys don't mind, we'll go to public, because maybe we'll get some more questions out of them too.
Well, I've been to all these meetings. So the north-south cutoff to me seems like, I just question why. It seems to me that if you want this to continue and expand, that you would go the whole length. So my question, that's a question, and why? And oddly, I have a question for Mike. Has he ever heard of anyone selling airspace besides farmers, which seems like a density bonus issue, instead of obviously not building on top of their land? But have you ever heard of people buying airspace?
Anytime the condo's sold is buying airspace.
Yeah, but without owning the underneath as a whole. The whole complex owns everything.
Right, and it would be sold. You can't sell obviously individual pieces of airspace, but it would be a condo association. Some developer builds whatever, 50, 100 condos above it, and it's a condo association above the retail.
But it seems very complicated because you'd have to participate in the property taxes of the people downstairs, and it just
it would almost be kind of another offshoot. Nobody ever heard of tenancies in common in San Francisco, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and now they have tenancies in common.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just a variation to see if it can be done and if it's viable.
Okay. And my question was the north-south thing.
Yes. So the rationale for that for San Jose is the dividing line unofficially is because there is that height differential of 10 feet. So perhaps heights are more palatable in the southern portion because of that. Also because there are a number of city projects in development so far, such as the 2212 Beach Boulevard site, such as the library, and then development as it currently is now is a little bit higher intensity than development in the residential neighborhoods to the north of San Jose. So that delineation was mainly just to acknowledge that, though it's within consideration that mixed-use center could be applied to the length of Palmetto.
Okay.
And then just to follow
up. I'm sorry, just to clarify, Allison, when you say that there's already an increased height south of San Jose, you mean that the development pattern is already a little bit more intense there?
Yes, now. The intensity of development.
Right. It's already a little bit higher than it is north of the heights of the buildings.
But isn't also, did I misunderstand it when you said that there's a physical height differential between the ground?
Yes, that's right.
If you're going towards the golf course, you're going downhill, right?
That's right.
Right, so that downhill would mitigate some of the height impact if you went south Palmetto.
And then I just wanted to add to the historical resources question. It's chapter 6, page 4 of the existing conditions report that maps where those local landmarks are.
I got it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Are we okay to go to open for public comment now? Everybody good? Okay. All right. We've got a lot of folks. Now would be the time to raise your hand. If you are on a phone, you will hit *9 to speak. You will need to know the last 4 digits of your phone number if you don't have your name appear here. So we've got quite a few hands being raised. And
Mayor Martin?
Yep.
This is Denise. I just wanted to, through you, remind the public that public comment, because this is a special meeting, public comment is only appropriate for items on the agenda. So just strictly the specific plan item.
Thank you for the reminder. So we are looking, we've got quite a few hands being raised. I'm curious if we should limit to 2 minutes this evening if we want to end by 9 p.m. Let's see, is there a desire by council? I'm looking at heads. Got quite a few hands being raised here, so. Limit public comment to 2 minutes?
Yes.
To get through, okay. Yes?
That's okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so public, limit your comments to 2 minutes, please. We want to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to speak. Thank you for being mindful of that. I don't want to cut you off. So I will hand it over to Elizabeth or Clerk Coffey. Can't remember who.
Good evening, Mayor Martin and council members. Elizabeth Brooks, Deputy City Clerk. We'll start this evening with Chris Redfield. When Clerk Coffey's ready, please state your name for the record.
Good evening, Chris Redfield. I want to say good evening to staff and council. So I just want to say I strongly advocate for amending the city's height restrictions in regard to the Sharp Park Pacific plan. I was disappointed that the owners of Eureka Square were unwilling to add height to the existing structures, but I'm pleased to see the appealing upgrades recently done. The historic architectural style must extend to new structures with ground floor retail and upper floor or floors having much better use of the footprint. To extend heights to a minimum of 45 feet in descending order from Francisco West is common sense land use. Emphasis must be placed on the distinct historical style with mandatory use of building materials that can endure the harsh coastal environment. The history of West Sharp Park alone can be a draw for intelligent residential and commercial planning and development. I was very happy that the city finally updated the in lieu parking fees for possibly funding a structure in the future, parking structure in the future. And I think a residential parking permit plan is definitely critically important to move forward. I also liked Allison's statement that residential units are a key component to any development, in addition to Pacifica moving forward on state mandated RHNA housing numbers. Finally, the seawall is the one major component. While it is clearly a physical obstacle, let's not let it become Pacifica's epitaph. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kurt Keast. Please state your name for the record.
This is Kurt Keast, and I just wanted to ask that the staff tonight play the video visualization and the 3 side-by-side visualizations, hopefully with some essentially commentary from Allison. Many people have seen the visualizations that were presented via the email, but many of the people attending the meeting tonight were expecting to see those visualizations and saw a very nice PowerPoint presentation, but without the actual visualization. So I would take several minutes to show the short video the walk through Palmetto and the side-by-side visualizations so people understand. On a particular point, I strongly favor the plan as visualized. In particular, I would note that how important on those visualizations the addition of trees are. I think it would be remarkably clear if you took those exact computer drawings and removed the trees from them, how barren and sterile and imposing those structures would be and how people would turn against this project. The reverse is by adding the trees, all of a sudden this becomes welcoming and very important. So I would have a key component is, and by the way, when should we plant the trees? Like yesterday, of course. So go for trees and please show the visualizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
Next, we'll hear from Christine Bowles. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Christine Bowles. I'm a licensed architect in Pacifica. Our previous home in San Francisco is off of Ocean Avenue near City College, where we lived for 27 years, had the same kind of transformation just recently. Our experience is that the denser zoning can really improve a neighborhood. We went from several mediocre restaurants and car repair facilities to new retail, grocery stores, August-rated restaurants, a new library, and more parks and playgrounds. This improved the neighborhood, gave more opportunities for connections with neighbors, and ultimately raised our quality of life as well as our property values. I do have a few questions. I agree with the 45-foot height limits and perhaps even 55 feet if a restriction was added to keep the development to 4 stories and a roof deck. You would want to avoid 5 floors crammed into a 55-foot height. Building massing should also be broken up vertically and set, and cantilever balconies in the residential units would help. and perhaps above a certain height, these could cantilever over the property lines. I want to ask if a geotechnical and hydrology study has been done recently to understand the existing soils and groundwater levels. A lot of this area is noted as seismic liquefaction prone as well as a tsunami area, which will affect the foundation designs and recommended floor heights at the ground floor. Does more space need to be allocated on the street side for accessibility ramps? What models of sea level rise are being used in current planning, and how often are those updated? The data the Coastal Commission uses from OPC was recently updated in 2018, and yet the current Pacifica General Plan updates only include data from up to 2009. According to this OPC report, sea level rise after 2050 could be much more extreme, as globally we are not reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Sea level rise figures don't include storm surges. Even now, there are days when the water streams over the seawall. Is that being considered? New construction should be based on a minimum of a 100-year life using conservative projections for sea level rise.
Our next speaker is Jim Heldberg. Please state your name for the record.
Did that unmute?
Yes. We can hear you.
Is it working? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm very excited about this. I think it's just a splendid idea, and I'd like to see it happen. I hope it's not just blue sky fantasy. I hope we can actually get something done out of this. I hope, though, that we're not ignoring our front yard. The beach is our front yard, and we want to be making that welcoming for the public too. So I hope as we're spending time and planning here, we're planning for the beach as well as Palmetto, which, by the way, maybe ought to get a different name. I don't think Palmetto is a very good name for that, but I have no other suggestions. When you talk about commercial, are you talking about retail only, or are you talking about offices? Could a Silicon Valley software company come in and live in this area, or a legal firm, or an insurance processing company, that kind of thing? I would like to know what the plan is for the City Hall area, the Little Brown Church and the City Hall, and the planning department. I didn't see that mentioned at all. And let's see, I had one other thing here. I think those are the major items. Have any of the Silicon Valley companies, potential users of this property, been consulted about how they'd like to build it, or is it simply blue sky at this point? That is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Guillet, you're our next speaker. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Jeff Guillet. Thank you very much, City Council, for having this meeting. I really appreciate it. I love the visualizations. I think they look great. I'm in favor of mixed use center for some areas. I think it provides it increases vibrancy, and I think it creates kind of an anchor for the neighborhood. I think that is really special, and it looks really good on paper. I think if you build it, they will come, and if you have more stories, you have some areas, I'm not talking about all Palmetto, but some of the areas as a mixed use center, that will increase the number of people there. It'll provide more housing, and I think that's overall a very good thing. I love the idea of reimagining Sharp Park, but I'm wondering, what about the existing housing and building that's there? Is the idea to redevelop that? There's some buildings there that wouldn't really fit into the visualization that we saw, so I'm curious how that would work. I think it's paramount importance to replace and extend the seawall to protect the neighborhood around that area. And I would like to be sure that solar is part of this plan, so that some of these, all the buildings, all the new construction includes solar as part of it, so that they can become independent from power from PG&E. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Thompson, you're our next speaker. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, am I on?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name's Tom Thompson. I've been a Sharp Park property owner and taxpayer for 33 years now. I love our vision for Sharp Park, and the SPSP is spot on in terms of goals. The investment by the private sector to achieve these goals is never going to happen, though, without, at a minimum, a commitment by Pacifica to resolve the seawall problem first, especially the hotel. It seems to me that this would be the time and place to get Pacifica's commitment to seawall improvements, as well as infrastructure maintenance and improvements down in writing. Otherwise, the SPSP is just wishful thinking. The SPSP must be clear that passively allowing the ocean to wash away streets and utilities, a sewer pumping plant, homes and businesses is not an option for Pacifica. So I have a question. Is there any reason the City Council cannot now include a commitment in the SPSP document to resolve the seawall problem at a future date as soon as funding issues are resolved, and instruct staff to include such language in the SPSP now? I'll repeat the question. Is there any reason the City Council cannot now include a commitment in the SPSP document to resolve the seawall problem at a future date as soon as funding issues are resolved, and instruct staff to include such language in the SPSP now? And I request a direct answer tonight to this question in tonight's meeting. Thank you.
B. Murphy, you're our next speaker. Please state your name for the record. B. Murphy, you are our next speaker.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Hi, this is Brian Murphy O'Flynn, and I'm a property owner in Sharp Park for a number of years. I do like the proposed improvements along Palmetto. I think it's important to provide a center point for the neighborhood. I'd like to echo what the previous speaker said about the importance of making the seawall improvements a cornerstone of this overall effort. I know that the seawall to the north of the pier has been under some consideration because it's a different construction type than that of south of the pier. I've spoken to several engineers, some who have had extensive experience in Pacifica, and they find that the seawall to the north of the pier could be fairly cost effectively retrofitted, but via certain piling and curtain walls behind, but we can discuss that later on. I also wanted to echo the point that Councilmember O'Neill brought up about the Barbary Coast idea. I have a similar idea for along Beach Boulevard out on the pier, and it would be kind of an open air interpretive center that would include the type of fairly instructive and informative and engaging sort of placard displays, which are set at an angle that anyone could review, and it would include the ocean ecology, it would include the history, it would include things about waves and so forth, all the things that we love so much about Pacifica, and could be incorporated all along Beach Boulevard, around the pier, the types of sea life that are there, the fish species and so forth. And I'm also, in terms of health and wellness, I think it might be a good idea to have something like what they used to call a park horse, which is a fitness stations along somewhere along the promenade and maybe onto the berm as well. Thank you very much for your time.
R.M. Runeals, you're our next speaker. Could you please state your name for the record? R.M. Runeals.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to let you know that everything I'm hearing, I'm really excited about. I was on Westpac many moons ago. I'm over a 40-year resident of the neighborhood, and I favor the plan with additional mixed use. The height of the buildings, I think it would be, as it was presented, more compatible south of San Jose. And I like also the parking in the rear of those proposed buildings, the offset of the roof line, and if you move the building back a little bit, it would allow the sidewalk to be a little deeper, which is something we really couldn't do in the original plan when we did streetscape because of, well, at the time it was money and it was the amount of disruption to the businesses. But deeper sidewalks in front of those new buildings would definitely be a good idea, especially if the businesses plan to do any sidewalk events. Thank you for sending the mailer out. It was very helpful to the neighborhood to be notified. The trees, we were originally going to plant trees for those bulb outs, but we had difficulty finding a tree that was compatible with the environment and the salt air. Also, watering and maintenance was an issue for maintaining the trees. The public plaza. Mike mentioned this, and we originally felt that it was important to try to create some areas where smaller events could be done in the street for the public without having to shut the street down like you have to do for Fog Fest every year. And definitely for all of this to work, we've got to have the seawall. That seawall is very important, and I just really hope that council is willing to go to bat for this project, because the seawall, without it, we're just not going to get any of this done at all. And like the gentleman before me said, no one's going to put any money forward for it either, with the risk of the ocean and the sea level rise. Thank you, and good work to everybody, especially to the developer or the project creators and putting this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Beth Lemke, you're up next. Could you please state your name for the record?
Hi, this is Beth Lemke. I am been a property owner in Sharp Park since 2006 and a business owner since 2010. And I want to thank everyone involved in this plan. It was just beautifully done. I also appreciate the video visuals. And I wanted to say that I appreciate that this plan is for the betterment of the whole community. So my property will actually lose views if this is done. And I'm not, that doesn't mean I'm actually in favor of this. And I also appreciate what the presenter earlier said about the fact that this is not a done deal. I mean, this is just to give ideas. But that said, I understand it's for the betterment of the full community, and I support it. And I also very much appreciate Mike bringing up the idea for like a public plaza or something, because that's important, I believe, to have some little mini I don't know if you would call it amphitheater, but like a gazebo area or a plaza. I really like that idea. And also maybe developers can somehow mitigate loss of views for property owners like me. But again, I still support the plan because I understand it's for the betterment of us all, and we'll all get to enjoy it. And if I don't get to see the castle, I can go visit the castle, even though I can't see it from my house any longer. So thank you, everyone that's involved in this planning.
Thank you.
David Broussel, you're up next. Could you please state your name for the record?
Hi, I'm David Broussel, property owner in Sharp Park for 10 years or so. I want to thank everybody too for all the work you've been doing and for all the updates and meetings with the public and everything. It's very nice to know what's going on. A couple of things I was thinking is the height of the buildings when you get up to 5 stories. I'm not sure if people really realize how tall 5 stories is. I noticed in your slide presentation, for example, slide 31 has a couple of very charming looking buildings that would look great, and they're only a couple of stories high. We have some 3-story, fairly modern buildings across from 2212 Beach Boulevard. on one of the side streets, and that's a nice height for now. Picture that another story up, and I think that might be enough. I understand there's the issue of, higher density housing and all that. All I'm thinking, part of the year I spend in Glendale, California, that had a big building boom, and they built a lot of apartment mixed use property, very similar to the ones in the illustrations. And it's just become canyons. It's a dead zone. It's not very attractive. Just throwing that out there. But I do appreciate that's all that's been done, and I'm really excited to find out what's going to happen. I'm in favor of trees, big setbacks on the sidewalks, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Bob Bowles. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Bob Bowles. I'm an architect. I've only lived here for a year and a half or so, but my wife and I really love Pacifica. I think this is really an excellent start. I want to congratulate the planners who have put this together. My feeling is that higher density is a good thing in city centers. You look at any great city all around the world, and it really relies on high density. If anything, I would look at doing higher density, in both the north and the south areas. I'm a little curious about the parking situation. There was a note about parking being in the rear of the buildings. It wasn't really shown. I'm a little skeptical about how you're going to get all these the units on the properties with parking at the ground level. Wondering if they've looked at parking underground, if that works with the geotechnical considerations. I think it's much better to build up existing downtown elements and use infill lots than to build on the periphery of town and on the steep hillsides. Let's see. I'm also interested if we're looking at how we extend the bike paths on Palmetto, which are really nice now, how we extend those out into the neighborhood so that people can get to the downtown more easily. I'm a little skeptical of the idea of public plazas, especially if there's a bunch of little ones. I've seen a lot of dreadful small plazas that are thrown in downtowns around the Bay Area, usually full of homeless people and or garbage. They can be nice, but I think it'd be better to maybe concentrate on one area and make it especially nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a double hand raised. Anyone else have any more comments? You can only make one comment this evening, unfortunately. Unless, Jeff, you are somebody else at your house.
Mayor Martin, would you like me to check in with the attendee Jeff Guillet or move on to our next speaker?
Yes, please.
Cindy Abbott, you're our next speaker.
Good evening. I'm Cindy Abbott, a West Sharp Park resident of 24 years, and I'd like to express my thanks to staff for moving forward with this first set of visualizations. They're a good starting point. However, the visualizations show Palmetto Avenue as an area isolated from the small-scale cottage-style homes that surround the street. The visualizations also don't show the impact on views. While today Pacifica doesn't have a view ordinance, for this area that's strategically trying to create the draw between Palmetto Avenue and the coast, views are critical. While I support the overall idea of the plan to increase the vibrancy of the area, the increased height being put forth, particularly after seeing the visualization, makes me very uncomfortable. I'm requesting that we not increase the heights, or at most to do it only on the south end of Palmetto to the 45-foot level, and to review alternative approaches that still achieve the goal of vibrancy, placemaking, and connectivity. I think this planning process has been experiencing a little bit of a goal creep too. trying to also achieve the regional housing allocation plan at the expense of this small historic neighborhood. The area under study for the Sharp Park specific plan represents less than 3% of the buildable land in the city of Pacifica. The constrained network of small one-way streets, lack of parking, also dictates developing alternative ideas to achieve the city goals. As one council member stated at the last meeting, plans for Palmetto have been in the works for decades. However, what's being presented with significant height increases disregards the character of the neighborhood with an idea to overdevelop in this highly constrained and vulnerable area. Please find the right way to balance the needs of the city and the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Guillet, are you a repeat speaker or is there someone else under the same username?
Hi, it is me. I only have one thing I just wanted to say. I really appreciate
Jeff.
these
I'm
Zoom
sorry, Jeff.
meetings.
Jeff, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. It just wouldn't be fair to everyone else. Thank you for understanding. So now's the time for anybody who hasn't spoken to raise their hand. There's another hand raised.
Kathleen Courtney, please state your name for the record.
Hey there, I'm Kathleen Courtney, and thank you so much for your time tonight. And I have spent some time diving into this Plan Pacifica, and I find it really invigorating and an inspired way to address most of the issues that are on the table. I believe that anything that's not addressed can that we together could move sensitively forward, and that there's nothing stopping us from moving forward from this point. So I like that it addressed the big picture of priority awareness of interior and exterior light. I'm from the film industry, so that's really important. I know how important that is. And I also like that it does address the views in the way that at least if we could pay attention to the way that I see it visualized in the animation as well as in the stills, that it goes, oh gosh, now this is where I show my dumbness, but how it goes up and like kind of like hat shaped. Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. Step plan, so that at the top, there's very little view that's affected, and at the bottom, there's the most that's affected. So I really like that awareness. I haven't seen that, but most important is safety. And safety, I believe, must be addressed with maintaining the infrastructure here. And so the way to do that is to address, let's go forward with a plan like this that can make a lot of money, and then we can keep our beach homes and walls safe for our citizens. We can update and improve our roads conditions. We can maintain safe and clean beaches. We can do all that with the money that would be made from this plan that I see on the table. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you. Okay. If no one has anything else, I will close public comment. A lot more attendees than folks who wanted to speak, which is also good. Thank you for showing up. So we'll all close public comment. We'll come back to council. There's a lot of really good issues brought up. Mike, but before you talk, Mike, is it the council's desire that we sort of have Allison and or Bonnie answer as many questions as they can from the public? I'm sure you were taking notes too, but I also have some. And then Mike, how do you want to start? Mike, do you want to start first, or do you want to have?
Oh, no, I think it'd be good to have the public questions answered. I actually just wanted to amend my comments that Bob Bowles mentioned one plaza. That's what I was thinking, is like one and done, not a lot of small plazas. So
Got it. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem, did you have some? You're on mute.
I wanted to explore the request of one of the speakers about is it possible to show the visualizations because it sounds like some people didn't have an opportunity to see that. I just don't know if technologically we can do that and how that would work.
Yeah. And further to that, I'd like to see slide number 19 again, because that actually shows heights and density a little bit more clearly. Councilmember Beer, do you have something else? Or? No? Okay. Bonnie, do you want to help sort through some of those questions? Or do you want me to go ahead and list some of the questions that I heard?
Yeah, if you don't mind taking the lead on where you would like to go and which ones you would like answered, maybe Allison and I can take turns responding to them.
Okay, cool. Maybe if we could, can we see that video? Mayor Pro Tem Beckmeyer requested. I know it's technologically possible. I'm just not sure if you're prepared to do that.
Clerk Coffee, I have the video pulled up if you would like me to share my screen.
Yep, we can do that. Awesome, thank you.
And Allison, would you be able to kind of walk us through the video as it's being shown?
Sure. So just some context, this background shows a existing and a proposed virtual walk down Palmetto. So as we are coming up here, we're starting from Montecito, and on our left, we can see our first site, which is at 2100 Palmetto. This lot is 0.14 acres. It has a height of 50 feet. There are 7 units. You can see an active ground floor here. As we continue along, we get to our next site, which is at Palmetto Ave and Santa Rosa Ave. And then this lot is 0.18 acres, 50 feet, 8 units, and 2,900 square feet. And then we can see here what development looks like above. We're continuing on, and there's a little bit of a gap. Fast forward, and now we are at our third site. This time we're approaching Palmetto from in the southern direction. And we can see here Palmetto and Santa Maria Avenue. This is 45 feet. As we pan towards the ocean, we can see that the views for the ocean are preserved. There are 13 units here. And as we're panning back to the street, we can see setbacks and sorry, it went a little fast, but an enhanced, vibrant, sharp park, thanks to a lot of these features that the buildings offer. And though that video and the sites are available at planpacifica.org, if anyone would want to take a look again, or there's also a slider to see a before and after of what Palmetto looks like now and what that development looks like on each of those sites.
Thank you. Okay, and also pull up slide number 19. Okay. So I just want everyone to notice there's a beautiful, colorful rendering there, but what our eye doesn't immediately go to is the gray buildings in the background, which are also of similar and or higher heights there. So that's a very crowded area that looks similar to Glendale to me. And I just want everybody to know that what we're looking at is very close to the ocean there. And that's all. There was also a request to look at slide 31. Yeah, slide 31. Maybe it wasn't slide 31 because that's what I wrote down though, but the gentleman said that it was another depiction of density. So I did my best. whoever said that. Mary, you look like you're.
I just wanted to make a comment. You know, I really appreciate the visuals that were created. Thank you so much. But I was expecting to see how the height was going to affect the neighborhood, and I didn't see that at all. Like, I didn't see any of the houses or the cottages around these buildings, and I think I was expecting that. So I just wanted to make that, put that into the record. And there are some questions, Deirdre, I'm sure you wrote them down too, but.
Go ahead.
Well, just going from like the top down, we had one person ask about the geotech hydrology study and then how often sea level rise data is updated.
So the environmental impact report effort that will be performed to support the approval or the consideration of the specific, the Sharp Park specific plan will have to include a consideration of geology and soils. So Allison, her consulting firm will handle that, managing that analysis. It hasn't been completed yet. It is, we are in the admin draft preparation phase of the EIR. So that information will come in the future.
And I just wanted to add to regarding the comment about impacts on surrounding neighborhoods. We were working under the assumption that we would be doing visualizations from the pedestrian point of view. But I do want to note that in some of the visualizations in the features, we do talk about daylight plane and show that site adjacent to existing development and how the design techniques help to minimize the impacts of shadow. And then in site 3, we show how height steps down in those residential units from, you know, it's 4 at the straight, then 3, and then to 2. So it is at the same scale of those smaller residential buildings that are adjacent to the east and west sides of Palmetto.
And I would like to just add on to Ms. O'Connor's comment about the geotech. I just wanted to state that Bonnie is correct that the EIR, which will contain the technical documents, will be released with the final document. But Diet and Bhatia uses some of the technical inputs when developing these plans. So they're not proposing, you know, higher heights or higher buildings in areas where the soils could not support those buildings. So I just wanted to make that point that it's not like we're doing this study in a vacuum. We have all of that technical data informing us, and it is released all together with the environmental document and the final documents to the public for review. So maybe Tina and Bonnie, then you could answer the question that came up. I think 2 or 3 folks mentioned it about the seawall, and my assumption was that is completely separate from the Sharp Park specific plan. We're dealing with those types of challenges under the local coastal plan and the general plan. But as far as the Sharp Park specific plan, the assumption is that all properties will be protected because that's what we have noted in our local coastal plan. Yeah, absolutely. I just want to echo some of the comments that the speakers made, and that is extremely important. And indeed, the council took maybe, I think it was 18 months to study that issue. And that study, the results of that study resulted in our policies in our local coastal land use plan that was adopted by the City Council earlier this year. And as you know, those policies indicate that the city will continue to protect the Sharp Park neighborhood. And so that's what is reflected in the specific plan. And so this specific plan is moving on from there, continuing with that direction from council. And then what is the vision
from there on, how are we going to envision this neighborhood into the future?
Okay, thank you.
If I
Mayor Pro Tem?
If I could add to that, this is Kevin Woodhouse, City Manager. I just wanted to add to what Assistant City Manager Weremeister said. The other half of that formula is that the city has actually begun with state funding, $1.5 million of state funding, to specifically work on the feasibility and design of the Beach Boulevard seawall project. And as a matter of fact, I believe coming up on December 3rd is another community meeting regarding that project. So that project is in its design phase, and future challenges that we have relate to the funding of that project. And I've spoken before how that'll be a mix of local and regional and state and federal funding to fund that expensive project. But that project is moving down the road.
That was one of the points I was going to make is December 3rd is the next meeting with regard to that, the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project. And that is a key element of all of what we're talking about. And linking to one of the questions from one of the gentlemen who spoke, I think Mr. Murphy referenced a fitness exercise course, so like a PAR course or something along that line. And that actually is woven into the plan, which will be discussed a bit, I think, at that Beach Boulevard meeting. But because of the work that'll be done in that promenade area and on the seawall, the effort to build that out is deferred. So we had a discussion on that at a council meeting a couple months ago or something. And so some smaller elements of that are going to be put in place now, and the funding and the plan to do the rest is going to be added later, so that you don't build something that you have to tear out. And thus, so it's a bit of a delay, unfortunately, but there's that. And then I did want to ask a question about parking. It did come up a few times. And in the communication that we received in writing prior to the meeting, some specific questions around ADA, parking, disability, parking for disabled and accessible parking. And how can you, could you please talk about that in light of some of the other concepts that were proposed around perhaps there's space to put trees in part of parking places, and linking to the idea of parking in the back of the building. And sometimes people talk about a different parking structure. So could you address parking and vehicle movement in the area?
Sure, I can try and take that. I think that we would definitely consider ensuring that there was sidewalk access along the street if we were going to be considering or talking about trees in the public right-of-way. I'm not 100% sure about what parking in the back might have to do with accessibility, but there was another comment about parking underground, and I think we would try and avoid parking underground because of, any sea level rise potentialities, and because of the cost, because it would be so much more expensive to do underground. But ADA accessibility would definitely be something that we consider as we are planning the streetscape, and what public realm improvements would look like.
And I would just add to that it's required. It's not just a consideration. It's actually mandated requirement.
It's the law. Yeah, sorry.
It's the law. And so we certainly will have all of the required ADA accessibility.
And then if I could just continue on that theme for a second, one of the questions that we've been asked to consider tonight and give our feedback on is the issue of mixed use neighborhood versus mixed use center. And you described the densities and the number of living units that could be placed in each of those. I'm thinking about, again, and I think many people think about, attached to each of those living units is X number of vehicles. So if you can describe, when you talk about the different heights and densities in a mixed use neighborhood versus a mixed use center, in one example that you gave, there was a 7-unit versus a 14-unit option. If you had one or the other, how would you address parking, for example, in either of those options?
So
Sure.
I'll start. Sorry, Allison. I just wanted to start and just state that this, just as a reminder, I know the council is aware that we're considering this as a parking district, and so we haven't completed the study, but we're looking at identifying areas for a combined, public parking area, so that a project that may not be able to accommodate all of their parking on site would have an option to pay into the improvement district to provide that parking. And then I'm sure Allison had something to add. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, I was just going to say that we did consider the number of parking spaces that would be needed to accompany this residential development. And I think as of now, the ratio is about 1.2 spots per unit for each of these, with the exception of Site 3, which has 19 parking spaces for the 13 units. And the parking requirement is really going to depend on what's happening at the ground floor too. So this is just to say that parking requirements are going to be a consideration that we need to examine in the plan.
Thank you.
I would just add to that one of the framework items that we're looking to get your approval on is by adding density, adding the desire for Samtrans to provide additional transit to the area, and also creating a complete neighborhood to maybe reduce the number of trips that people living in the area would have to make. So maybe some of those elements would reduce the need for at least the residential parking.
I have a question. At some point, is there going to be a traffic study? Because I've talked to 2 people in the past couple of weeks that are really concerned about the stop signs. And I know for myself, like it's kind of, you have to kind of go out into the middle of Palmetto to make those turns. So anyway, I'm just curious if there's going to be a traffic study and if there'll be an opportunity to at least make the signs more clear or something, just improve that space.
Yeah, and maybe my colleague Rajiv can jump in on this too, but I think there will be a traffic study done, and that would just need to account for, we need to know how many people are moving in first before we can get going on that. Is that correct, Rajiv? Okay.
That's absolutely correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Did anybody else have any more questions that they documented? I have a couple, but go ahead, Mike.
So I just wanted to repeat that was actually something I meant to say, but I didn't. That individual that did the speaking, I would like one public plaza. I don't think a lot of small ones is worth the effort. I think they would become attractive nuisances. I'm also looking at, I'm assuming that the units you're speaking of, majority are going to be rental, or are they going to be for purchase? Are they going to be condo conversion, or is that up to the developer that builds the building?
The last of what you said, yeah.
The last to build. Okay, so therefore, if someone has an existing building there, and let's say they merge 2 lots, they buy 2 buildings next door to each other, they could then combine them into one big building or whatever, but they would be under the same guidelines we are speaking of tonight, correct?
Absolutely correct. And in effect, because the lots are so small
it may be advantageous of some property owners to combine them, because otherwise providing parking becomes very difficult. You know, you cannot always find ways to park efficiently. So in some instances, it would be a great idea if some people wanted to combine the lots, so we get more efficient buildings, you know, less cuts along the sidewalk, because when you go inside, you know, you have to have the driveway that goes inside. There are all of those considerations. And you were looking for, you know, a plaza somewhere where someone could put a Christmas tree. You mentioned that earlier. So if there's a bigger building, there's an opportunity for them to still, you know, have some level of efficiency with the floor plate while allowing for a public plaza. So all of those are good reasons for, you know, if two owners wanted to combine the adjacent lots, it'd be great. Yeah.
Is there any way a project or wording could be put in there? Because I know there was consideration for a project where it was like 3 different owners and they were kind of collaborating, keeping separate ownerships of their parcels, but collaborating, so like the driveway was on one, entered both, you know, back of both buildings.
Yeah, you know, we could certainly look at language that has a minimum parcel size before people can go to like 40, you know, go to 50, 55 feet from 45, for example, then we can come back into the analysis, because it may not make sense on very small lots to do that and go that high. Mm-hmm. So we can certainly look at language that has a cutoff point, and that may also be an incentive for some property owners to combine their parcels if they're very small.
And in regards to a concept one individual made about solar panels, if we put, let's say, a 45-foot height limit there, does that solar panel count as part of the height limit?
No, because solar panels are requirements under state law now. They have to be done. So there was a gentleman who said we should require solar. I mean, they're required as of, I'm not sure as of January of next year or when the requirement is coming from multifamily, but it's there when this will happen. And solar panels are excluded under state law from height requirements and design reviews. So those would be, you know, on top of that. Yeah.
Okay, because I know some are pretty steep, you know what I mean, and stuff. I do like the idea of having some sort of design guidelines, like what we have at Rockaway. I think that should be encouraged and asked for. And I do think if we do go for the higher limits, I definitely want step back. I don't want the canyons like you have downtown San Francisco. I am concerned about the trees, though, is I do think trees add a lot of ambiance. They're very nice and everything. But for years, we've been told they can't find a species that works there. So I am very, you know, I really would like to see that. So maybe we could have, you know, more coastal type of plants that could work there. You know, trees would be preferred, but I also think we have to be realistic, is that the city would be maintaining them, and nothing's worse than a bunch of dead trees. You know, yeah.
I'll just add that we consulted the Pacifica tree. I can't remember if it's a manual or what the language is for what species would be able to grow in this. So the Sharp Park area is in zone 1, and the types of trees that can grow there, I think these are based on the Melaleuca or the Cajuput, forgive my pronunciation, for any arborists.
Well, you know, we can certainly, you know, if, you know, we haven't researched all of the appropriate species, and there are a lot of considerations that'll need to go into the selection, including how deep the roots go, for example, salinity, you know, how much they can handle. There is the fog component, so there isn't as much sunlight. I mean, there are all of those considerations. I'm pretty darn sure there'll be, you know, some species that can grow out there. We just had to research that a little bit more, yeah. Right. And there was a question mentioned earlier about, will we lose parking spaces if we have on, you know, if we put them between the length of the cars? You know, I don't think so. And we can do a count, but we were careful because the blocks are not perfectly sized to have, you know, only, you know, so many 18-foot cars. There is like space left over, you know. So we can adjust it so that we don't, on a per block basis, I don't think we lose, you know, many spaces, or at least not in very many blocks, and you'll just bump it out. And the image Allison had the tree with just the grate at the street level, street surface level. But in Santa Cruz downtown, for example, if you've been there or elsewhere, you can just raise it a little bit at the, the sidewalk level so cars don't just as easily go into that. So there are techniques we can use if there's direction for us to try to, go in the direction, yeah.
And I also would really like to, and I think seems to be a consensus, is the parking in rear. I mean, I want to kind of avoid what we have with those two commercial buildings that have the parking in front of the stores. That's really not conducive for, window shopping type of thing. So, up by Raymond's Chinese and then the one block down. So, I mean, that's pretty much kind of like my comments.
So, Mike, I appreciate all those comments. Would Bonnie or whoever's operating the slide deck pull up the points for discussion for council? Because we have a hearty list of things to sort of come to an agreement or give some general direction. I think we all agree on the trees, and with a shake of the head, I think nobody even showed up saying they weren't opposed to trees. So, and I know several folks who emailed me and submitted comments on the trees too. So the more trees, the better. You can see that in any downtown area. Okay. So whichever landscaping direction that requires, I think that's a good point of direction. Does the council agree?
Yes.
Okay, great. One down. Okay. So for land use, should we start here?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. So Bonnie, just walk us through these top 2 bullet points here, if you don't mind.
Sure. So we are looking for your feedback and confirmation of should the mixed-use center land use designation be applied to all of Palmetto, but only allow projects along northern Palmetto Avenue, which is north of San Jose Avenue, to maximize the potential density above the mixed-use neighborhood levels if the project maximizes affordable housing production by exceeding current inclusionary housing ordinance requirements, which is 15% affordable units. And this was supported by the Planning Commission to allow for the northern portion of Palmetto to get to the mixed-use center density levels if it met the affordable housing minimums.
You said better than the current minimum, though. Like,
yes, I did say exceeding. Yes.
Okay.
But that kind of, can you please give me clarification on the discrepancy? State law said 5 units, and our ordinance says 8 units. Is this a suggestion that we amend that inclusionary ordinance or affordable ordinance?
No, it's not. It's not a suggestion of that. Our 15% affordable standard gets triggered at 8 units. That's a local ordinance requirement. It's the state density bonus law that can be triggered at 5 units. So a 5-unit development could take advantage of the state density bonus law and meet the city's 15% inclusionary housing minimum before making that 8 units. But the question is, if a development were to do that, exceed the local standards, would we want to provide them the ability to take advantage of those greater densities in order to do that?
So basically, I'm just restating it to be sure I understand it, is you're basically asking, if they meet the state requirements, are we going to allow them to have a denser project and build more units if we allow that, correct?
And taller.
Yeah, it would be taller height, as well as would they still need to meet the parking requirements of whatever, one, you know what I mean? Because would they still have to meet the other requirements we have of setbacks and all that other stuff?
Yeah. So, let's break that up a little bit. We're focusing on density. This first question is just purely about density. And they would have to meet the other zoning requirements. However, the state density bonus ordinance does allow for someone that is taking advantage of that bonus to ask for a certain number of concessions, depending on what type of affordable housing they're providing and how much. And so in that instance, they may get some ability to not have to meet the zoning requirements for maybe number of parking spaces or setbacks or some element along that line. But in general, yes, they would have to meet the zoning requirements. And so the question is, are you supportive of the idea of allowing additional density for them to do that with the benefit of getting those affordable housing units?
Okay, now, let me ask you this: can we define in this project the type of affordable units, just below market, or like there's another category and I'm forgetting the formal name, but like ultra low income? And then I would like to also know is, can we have it where it's kind of, instead of a studio apartment, maybe a family 1 or 2 bedroom requirement? Because I mean,
are we limiting ourselves though if we do that?
But the issue, the thing I'm getting at is the fact is that Pacifica has 4 housing projects for seniors. We have no affordable housing projects for families. Okay, and I'm just looking to see, can we dictate the type of affordable housing by income level and or family size?
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask about that too, because on packet page 19, where the red lettering is, it says heights up to 55 feet may be allowed if housing affordable to low or moderate income persons will be constructed in excess of the inclusionary zoning requirements or other significant public benefits. And to me, that's so broad that I don't agree with this statement, just because it allows for way too much. And I would say that we should be able to say very low and low income and take moderate out, and not have or other significant public benefits, because there's just too much in there for me to feel comfortable with any kind of 55 feet height,
Well, I feel uncomfortable.
So the question was asked, sorry, Madam Mayor, please go ahead.
Please go ahead.
No, I was just responding to a question that was asked, can the city, specify which kind of an affordable housing, should be provided? I mean, certainly you cannot force that on someone who's providing it voluntarily to avail of a state, bonus that's out there. But to the extent you are giving them a benefit that doesn't exist, like an additional height, benefit, for example, certainly, you can specify the kind of, affordable housing you would require. I would also mention that the next housing element cycle is imminent. It's coming upon us. We do it every 8 years. In the Bay Area, our cycle will start in 2023. The city will need to start on the housing update element cycle pretty soon. So that's one of the questions that can also be taken up at that time in light of the totality of the housing program that the city will envision for the coming years. I'm sorry to I spoke at the same time as Mayor Martin. I apologize here.
Well, I agree with you, and that's sort of what I was getting at with Councilmember O'Neill. I just kind of feel like it's sort of limiting. But at the same time, I feel Councilmember Beer's sense of discomfort, but mine comes from a different place. And it comes from a place of the neighbors and the neighborhood and the historic district and the character of that neighborhood. And I can't get that slide 19 out of my mind. I used to live on Palmetto, right across from the pump, a house there on Brighton. And so here's some example that I come with. When I was doing a site visit for one of the appeals, I met with some of the neighbors, and one of the gentlemen was a contractor, and he showed me where the shade would fall from this new building. And that really struck me because I live at the base of sort of a mountain, and I know that at certain times of the year, I will get sun. At 1:30 in the winter, the sun goes away. I have no sun. You have no idea that we are. But these people who live in the neighborhood right now are used to this cottage, old, Sharp Park, historic Sharp Park feel. And we're about to take that away from them. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable. There were some units built across from council chambers, which are a perfect example of sort of not fitting in, who I love the guy who built them, don't get me wrong, but they don't fit in. And it's kind of a shame. They're these big block figures that don't fit in with the character. So why are we calling, it historic historic Sharp Park? 55 foot is insane to me. When you're talking about a historic area, historic downtown, because none of that is actually historic when you're building it like that. I'm all for housing. I'm not sure that we need to do it in this neighborhood at the cost of the neighbors and the neighborhood there. And I think north of Paloma, yeah. But Sue, are you raising your hand? I can't.
Well, after you're done.
You're appearing and disappearing.
I know. It's,
That's okay. So anyway, go ahead, Sue.
In order to make this a vibrant downtown, which it's supposed to be our downtown. It's been planned for 20, 30 years that this would be the downtown. If you put housing on top of your commercial, you're going to make the area vibrant because those people who live there will shop there and stay there and play there. And it makes a big difference to the neighborhood. If you have people who just have to drive there like it is now, and there's very few shops and there's very few people who live there, then you don't have the same vibrancy you would if you added those extra stories of housing above. I mean, I've said that about Eureka Square forever, that if they just had housing above Eureka Square, all those shops would be busy all the time. Because people don't want to drive. They want to just go out of their house, walk across to the grocery store, walk to the shops, bike.
Yeah, I'm with you on Eureka Square because that's up on a hill. You're not really going to.
I know, but this is supposed to be our downtown.
Yeah, you're not really going to convince me, and I'm not going to convince you. So there's two of us right here. And if other council members want to weigh in, we don't have to draw this conversation out. Just like many other conversations, if there's a council majority on 45 or 55 feet, then I'm not going to waste everyone's time here talking about it and trying to convince you when I know I can't.
So if I could restate, I know it looks like there's another council member who wants to speak, but if I could restate the first and second bullets that we're looking for on height and density in a different way. Basically, what the staff report is asking for is, does the council agree that mixed use center, which is the higher density, higher height up to 55 feet, is appropriate in the south area of Palmetto? And then in the north of Palmetto, that is mixed use neighborhood with an option to increase density and height only when there is affordable housing provided, I think above the 15% affordable housing, regardless of how many units they start out with. So they don't have to actually make that 8-unit threshold, just 15%. Those are the two things. And to Mary's point, that is a benefit that the city would be giving that developer in exchange for more affordable housing. And we can, in that instance, stipulate, our requirements in terms of the density, and then the broad term, not the density, but the affordability. And the broad terminology that you were concerned about, I think we agree that we would not draft the document that way. We would take what we're hearing from you all and make sure that we put in some concrete policies as to what the council requires. I think that to the family makeup who could live in these units, I don't think the city can say you must rent to somebody, who has a family of 4 or 6 or whatever. But I think there are development standards that Diet and Bhatia, probably knows more than I, that would encourage that a 2-room or a 3-room apartment is rented by a family rather than maybe a single person, right? But if you're only building studios, for example, you're not likely to get a larger family size. So those are the ways that we can encourage, I guess more diversity in the folks who could be renting or buying these units by making sure that the unit type is diverse as well.
That's what I was referring to as the unit type. But 12 studios, I would rather have a couple multi-bedroom in there to encourage a family moving in.
So I guess maybe to boil it down, we need to know, is the council agreeing that Southern Palmetto should be mixed-use center and Northern could be mixed-use neighborhood? And then for the Northern, do you want to add the ability to increase height and density should the required affordable provisions be met?
Yes.
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 No. Mary? We can't.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Sue Beckmeyer, did you have something else?
I just wanted to, I'm trying to stay on track because I get encouraged to do that a lot at these meetings and not present too many ideas at one time. So I'm trying to stay right on pages 13 and 14 of our packet and check off the things as we hit them. So to not confuse matters and add too many topics in at one sentence. With regard to Councilmember Beer's statements around Francisco Boulevard and the concern she expressed around trying to, it sounded to me like pretty much drive retail to Palmetto, not on Francisco. And I believe if my check marks are accurate, that's the next thing that we're discussing under land use.
Correct.
So I'd like to talk about that a bit. We're seeing, what I consider to be increased vibrancy on a couple of blocks on Francisco. And we have mixed use already that has been recently developed in that area where we do have living units above and retail uses below, although Mr. Councilmember O'Neill will point out often they're services, not retail, right? Not commercial retail sales per se. However, a neighborhood has services. So I want to explore how do we put constraints around that, but also allow flexibility enough for a complete neighborhood, I think is the term Allison used, to evolve, to meet the needs of people, as Councilmember Vadalos just said, so people can walk there, so they can just walk to take care of whatever they need. And if it's on Francisco rather than Palmetto, is that, how do we work with that? That's kind of the whole topic that I want to discuss right now.
Right. And I wanted to also, I think, say the same thing, just reiterate what you're saying is that what staff and the consultant are trying to attempt, and maybe we didn't pick the correct wording there, but we're attempting to address the issue of the tension that we already feel when we were working our front counter and, you know, fielding questions from new businesses. And I think the council feels it every once in a while too, where you have businesses like that are more office-y, right? But they're really excited to be in a vibrant place. Like maybe their employees like to be able to walk to go to lunch, and maybe their customers appreciate, you know, being able to shop and run some errands while they're at their business. And so how can we accommodate those uses, which I think are, you know, critical for a complete neighborhood, but put them in places where there's not going to be that tension, but they're also welcomed and supported. Maybe not right on Palmetto. Maybe and maybe we also don't say that you can't have retail on Francisco, but maybe there is some other policy that we can develop so that they are encouraged to look in the places we want them to look for available tenant spaces.
Well, I think that gets to the whole theory of often employees of businesses support the local businesses. I mean, when I was working in banks, you know, we went to the restaurants right around the bank and we supported them, the dry cleaner there, everything else. And I think Francisco is a feeder street. I mean, the disadvantage is the fact that Francisco is the first thing they see when they're coming off the freeway versus Palmetto, you got to make the right, you know. But I support the concept of that being a feeder. You know, a lawyer takes a client out to lunch, they go for coffee, hairdresser, you know, the ladies after they get their hair done, they go to the restaurant, whatever, you know, so. And I think there's a mix. Well, I mean, I do know in San Francisco, I think they actually limit like the number of non-retail or there's some designation they have that they limit the number of that type of business in a store. And do we want to allow for mixed use? Can we have retail, restaurant, first floor, office, second floor, residential above it too? Does that fit in the mixed use designation?
Yeah, I believe that would fit in the mixed use designation. I think you would have to understand the balance of probably the developer is going to make the money off the residential. And so using the second floor for office space, there would have to be the support for that. And then how does that affect height to get the densities to make everything make sense? So.
Well, could we put standards if we do design guidelines, could you put standards in there? Like, you know, I discussed before of like every new construction's piped to make it a restaurant, because the biggest capital infusion is to put in a restaurant because of the venting, gas lines, etc. But could you make it so that like the first floor you required to put in the whatever's the code requirements for a restaurant, and then the second one basically just kind of an empty shell so that it could be an office or residential with walls put up?
Maybe. Oh, I was just concerned about the small businesses that are already there, so I wouldn't want to distract folks from going to there. So
well, I think, you know, you could make it an antique district because there's a lot of antique stores there and they feed off each other, you know.
So I will, I have familiarity with development agreements and requiring, you know, basically the shell to be prepared for a restaurant if a restaurant is there. I'll ask Rajiv and Allison to answer whether or not they've ever seen that kind of policy in a specific plan. Go ahead, Rajiv.
Yeah, it would be a pretty detailed policy to have. Let's not forget there is a zoning ordinance as well, and I'm not sure where cities are going with requirements for gas lines, as well in the future. Everybody seemingly is turning to electric only in the future. So, I mean, it requires an investment to, put in the grease traps and the gas lines and the venting and so on. So if the council feels like we should require it, certainly, we can require it. And maybe we require it along the South Palmetto stretch, where we do want to activate the street life. And maybe along Francisco, you would just sort of not require it as much. I mean, but those are the details we can work and sort of bring back to you if there is an overarching direction. I don't think we don't have the full specific plan for here, for you with all of the land uses allowed, conditional, and so on, sort of worked out right now. Yeah.
And I'm not saying to actually put in the venting and stuff. I'm just saying like you leave the hole so the pipe can go through it. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see.
I think we're trying to attract development, not push it away. And I think that, that might be a good idea, Mike, but if it's going to prevent somebody from building because of it, then I wouldn't be in favor of it.
Wouldn't it make it more marketable for them to get tenants? If, this could be a retail store, they put a piece of sheetrock over the vent. However, if that guy moves out, the restaurant wants to come in and they just have to put in the venting then. It's more adapting to whatever the current trend is. I mean, who knows? We might just want a bunch of UPS stores there because everybody's collecting and receiving boxes.
So there are some pretty standard, standards we use in terms of the minimum depth requirements, in terms of floor to, ceiling requirements and so on, that we would specify for places where we want active ground floor uses to be there. And those standards would then lend themselves to whether it's a cafe, that needs the event versus, another store that may not. So certainly I hear you, Councilmember Martin, that we should make sure that the shell that is designed can ultimately, allow itself if a Starbucks wants to come in for them to be there at the size fits. So certainly we'll write the spatial requirements so that these users can fit in out there. No question about it.
So I think on that item, I'm not sure if we've heard from all the council members, but I think what I'm understanding is that we want to continue to support the vibrancy that's already begun on Francisco. But we are also interested in kind of relieving the tension for kind of the office-y, I'm going to call it, uses, so that they're welcome to the area, but they are perhaps, incentivized to be maybe off Palmetto.
I'm okay with that. How do you feel about that, Councilwoman Beer? Does that meet what you were trying to outline?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it does.
Okay.
Actually, I think Half Moon Bay just had this issue come up where a retail type of business closed and the person that owned the building was an attorney. Then they moved their offices in and it kind of like threw the mix to more services versus retail. And Half Moon Bay actually passed an ordinance in regards to that, that issue. And I don't know if that you want to research that or look at that or whatever,
Well, that's a good example. I actually heard today somebody tell me that and I saw it, where Stuckey's used to be on Francisco, the fish market, a person wanted to move in there, but I don't know if this is true. I took him for his word. They said that the city said they didn't want a tax business there. They wanted a more visitor, commercial serving type of. I think that's great, but I was actually like curious. I wouldn't it's a tough situation, and I wouldn't want to detract anyone from renting from the guy that, you know, needs a buck either.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. This is not my area of strength, I'm going to admit. But in terms of incentivizing, if that's a word, visitor serving uses, that particular location that you're mentioning is kind of a thoroughfare for people that are going to walk along the promenade. That, you know, and so as you come under that overpass and seeing that corner spot there, if you can grab a sandwich or some food or something that's visitor serving and have the tax business upstairs, you know, that kind of a mix. I don't know how, though. What I don't know is how you incorporate those preferences, I suppose, into your zoning and land use statements about an area to steer it in that way. That is Director Burmeister's department, and Bonnie, and, you know, that's where I defer to you on that.
So the kind of the classic way to do it is, if you absolutely don't want a particular use, you actually put it in the zoning that it's not allowed there, right? But if you think that it could be okay, you know, it just depends on, you know, the specifics of the business, or maybe how the mix of land uses are going, you know, in the area. You could say that the tax office requires a use permit, but the sandwich shop or the visitor serving use is permitted. So it incentivizes and maybe discourages at the same time the uses that the council feels should be prioritized.
I see.
And there's other ways to do it, but that's just the classic example.
I see. And my impression is that all of that sort of comes at a later stage in this game.
Right. We would put in some policies, I think, but ultimately that would come with zoning, would be the strongest area to address that.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Upstairs in that building is residential. So the person who owns that building would never put a business upstairs when you could have residential, because residential is way more income than a tax office. Commercial rentals are so
I wouldn't support that either. I mean, residential is what we're looking for. So
right.
Thank you for that clarification. And that would be important to specify in the zoning. Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to mention was the concept of the active ground floor, which we explored in one of the workshops I can't remember when that was, when we had in-person workshops. But we can decide where we want an active ground floor to be, and we can do that either by specifying what the use will be, like Tina is talking about, or it could be certain design requirements that we want to be sure that we have in areas that are going to have high pedestrian traffic, whether that be, you know, a transparent facade or windows or things like that we can also incorporate.
Okay, so Tina, do you sort of, I think that you captured what everyone was saying about Francisco. Does everyone else agree? Yep. Okay. Back to the slide. Did we get North Palmetto? We covered South and we covered North at the same time, right? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So I think next is transportation and connectivity.
Right.
And so there's two bullets here. They're kind of separate issues. So the first one is, is whether or not 3 priority east-west corridors for bicycle and pedestrian connections should be established. I think we were initially going into this thinking that there may be maybe it would be narrowed down to 1 or 2 priority connections. But I think the feedback from the bike and ped master plan, and Bonnie, I think, was working with engineering more closely than I was on that project. I think the feedback is that, bicyclists maybe coming into the area from the north and the south, they're gonna make their left or right-hand turn right on Clarendon or on Paloma to get in there into the neighborhood. They're not going to go up to the pedestrian overcrossing unless they made a stop at Eureka Square for something, you know. So those were important to the bicyclists, and then pedestrians also were very much in favor of, you know, continuing their walk across the pedestrian overcrossing and into the neighborhood on San Jose. So I think we just wanted to get some verification that the council is good with that. And I think I'll stop and see if Allison has anything to add, or Bonnie. Allison or Bonnie, did you, or does anyone have?
No, Tina did well.
Yeah, I think that's great that you consulted the bike and ped master plan, especially now that we have a plan. So that's great. I like the idea of keeping the connectivity. Not sure.
Me too.
I'm happy with what's there. I mean, I think that's practical.
Yep. Would it take away parking spots to put, I mean, it shouldn't, because the bike lane can go right next to the parking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not my understanding that it would, but I'll look to Allison.
Yeah, it's also my understanding that it wouldn't affect parking because it is just the paint on the road.
Great.
Okay.
Hey, Jack.
So the next bullet is regarding the parking. And the question is, should policy emphasis be placed on providing residential parking on site, or should both residential and commercial parking be focused primarily in centralized off-site parking facilities? And I think the issue that staff wanted some direction on is, you know, we understand that, you know, council is in favor of a commercial parking district. The question is whether or not you want to extend that to residential. It would mean that the residential units would be using, you know, some of this public parking areas. We may get more contributions sooner, perhaps, if we included residential units in the parking district, but we just wanted to get your feedback there. And in some respects, you can look at it as the public, even though they'd have to pay into it, like the public spaces are assisting the residential units. If they didn't have the option to buy into the parking district, they'd have to somehow figure out how to do it on their site, which could be more expensive for them, or there could be some trade-offs for the developer.
Have we had any indication from the residents as to what their preference is?
The existing residents?
Yeah.
I'll look to Allison and Bonnie on that.
I don't have any feedback from existing residents, but just talking to potential developers on Palmetto, especially when they're trying to develop on a smaller size lot, that option to them would relieve them from having to work around a lot of design restrictions in terms of, you know, being able to turn around. It's not just so much the parking spot, it's getting to the parking spot, especially if it's in the rear. So it's, you know, the driveway and making sure that there's the curve is appropriate for the car to turn and what size car. So it would be beneficial to them, especially on the smaller size lots, to have this option, and may help encourage more residential development.
Okay, so I understand that we wanted to, you know, to give all these things to the developers, but if I'm going to rent a place, I'm going to want a parking spot. Like I'll be paying for that. So I would prioritize the inclusion of on-site, off-street parking for the residents within mixed-use development, which is what the planning department supported. So that's what I say. I'm gonna.
Well, would you then come back at a future meeting with designated parcels that would be reserved for parking? And then would we be able to have some sort of ordinance on that parking on that parcel, that retail on the bottom with parking above? So I don't know how much all these costs, you know what I mean? It's expensive to buy the land and then build a structure that will support cars above a store. You know, it's.
Yeah, so we will be, as we said earlier, we're studying the parking requirements or the parking in the area. And so we will be coming back with some recommendations and potentially even some, sites that could be considered. But I do think that it will take, with the zoning, it will take a lot more study to determine exactly where they would go, if it's a garage, if surface is enough, et cetera.
See, I think this is, I kind of agree with Mary, as I think that the residents kind of need a parking space. However, it gets back to the lack of public transportation we get here too. So, I mean, if you're a resident once an hour, you can catch the coach out, So I think I would almost prefer to defer making a decision on this until we have more information. Because we don't even have the numbers as to, like, if we did a residential, you had mentioned the residents buying in. Well, buying in determines a dollar amount. What is that? $100 a year permit fee, a $500 a year permit fee? Is it a permit fee, or is it does it need to go to a vote as a parcel tax on this specific parking area?
I agree that we don't really have enough information to be completely making a decision on this, although the question is, should policy emphasis be placed on this or that? So I want to ask Mary, Councilwoman Beer, what your thoughts are if you had parking that's designated, but near, but not in the exact building where you live. Like, we know how small these streets and neighborhoods are. If it's around the corner or adjacent and it's designated because the developer built that parking, do you see where I'm going? That it's connected to those residential units in some kind of way, but that it's not built into the physical building because of some of what Bonnie was saying about the length and the turnaround and the, getting the driveways in and all that.
I mean, as a renter, again, I would want a parking spot where I could take my groceries in without getting soaking wet. So that's where I'm coming from. And
yeah, me too, Mary. I mean, I know there are a couple places in like when I lived in the Esplanade apartments, my parking spot was actually across the street under the apartments across the street. Mm-hmm. Was annoying, but these are going to be brand new units, so there's no reason why we shouldn't be thinking about that stuff now. And further to that, if you're increasing height, you're increasing density, you're increasing retail, you're increasing trying to create a walkable environment, you're gonna need the parking on site because there's gonna be no parking. I mean, I get my hair done on Palmetto, and I used to be able to find a parking spot all the time before the pot shops moved in. Now I can't. And that's fine. That's great. I don't complain. But, we're opening another pot shop too. So it's going to get a little bit even worse. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the policy should emphasize residential on-site parking and then commercial off-site parking facility.
And I think that we should at least consider, and I don't know what the correct terminology is, but like, for instance, if a small cafe wants to open, that is where we should be able to make those accommodations for parking, right? If they need so many parking spots, right? A small cafe or something.
Got it. Okay.
And how long would it take to build a parking structure? I mean, that could be 20 more years down the line.
Mhm.
I mean, with our parking fees we have right now, that could be like 40 years down the line.
Well, I also think we need to look at complementary uses. Like, let's say you get a dentist's office in there. They're open during the day, not at night, while restaurants are open at night. So you can kind of count that parking space twice, once for the dentist, once for the restaurant. You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Mhm. And we don't know to what degree there may be some opportunities around working with transportation agencies too, right? So when we're talking about having Samtrans coming or some kind of arrangement, it's almost like that park and ride arrangement, but the 21st century version of it, where we get some parking out of the deal because there has to be a place for the minibus to come pick people up. So I don't know. I know that doesn't seem like conclusive, but I think I heard pretty clearly residential parking on site.
Yeah.
Should we move on?
Yes, thank you. It was just
Does staff feel like they have what they need?
Yeah, I believe we do. Would you like me to go through the next question?
Trying to find my page. Yes, please do. Oh, here. Go.
Okay. So this is on the topic of coastal resilience. Should the Sharp Park specific plan primarily refer to the coastal resiliency policies contained in the LCLUP, particularly as they relate to replacement of the Beach Boulevard seawall?
Yes.
Yeah, so this gets to my response that I gave earlier, and it's just, I think, confirming that the council agrees.
Yes, for me.
Yes, me.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think we did talk about this at the last meeting, whether there's, it seemed like there was language potentially already addressing this in a general, broader way included in the plan document. Am I misremembering that?
There's a bullet in the guiding policy framework that addresses this. Is that what you think you're referring to?
I think never mind. Go ahead. Who else has input on that?
Okay, well, I think I captured yeses and support for all around. So
I think it's just very important for us to be consistent in all of our documents and that they are all very clearly linked to each other and that the statement is evident and clear that we are supporting developing and creating whatever we need to have that coastal resiliency and protection of that area. So that it's not a question. And in this case, the Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project is the focus right now in that regard.
So we captured that feedback. Thank you. That is all of the questions that we had, unless there was anything that came to Allison or Bonnie's mind during the discussion. So the last one was, is there anything else that we should be considering or anything else that you all saw in the guiding policy framework that you wanted to bring up?
I just want to make a comment because there was a couple questions that we didn't get to. One was, what are we doing with City Hall? And I just wanted to make everyone aware that we are working, we had a study session on that a couple weeks ago. So that is being worked on separately as basically a city infrastructure project. Is that what it's called? Tina?
As a CIP project, capital improvement?
Yes,
project? Yes.
Thank you. So that is what is happening with City Hall. Somebody had asked that question. Somebody else asked, is our Sharp Park specific plan going to be welcoming to Silicon Valley companies? I think with the discussion that we had around the retail, with the discussion we had around Francisco Boulevard, if a Silicon Valley company fits into one of those, descriptions, then yes, we will be ready. Otherwise, maybe not. The other thing was a gentleman mentioned having, I'm forgetting the word, but basically, and Bonnie, you'll know because of OzPack, the placards that go, educational placards.
The medallions.
Medallion.
Well, no, separate from the medallions because that's a separate thing. But they're called, what are they called?
Storyboards.
Like that Brian talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Brian
Yes.
Murphy O'Flynn.
Yeah.
Interpretive. That's what they're called. Interpretive
signage. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm all for that on the pier, and I know that's sort of maybe even a different area, but just for future, I think that's a great idea. Regarding sort of the Barbary Coast, like medallion stuff, we actually have a very robust coastal trail marked out that the Open Space Advisory Committee undertook last year, implemented, and was very successful. So that is part of our part of the California Coastal Trail system. If there was a way to make it bigger and brighter and more beautiful and attract more people, that's wonderful. And I would suggest that whoever is liaison to the Open Space Committee, bring that up with them, because I think they worked very hard on that on their weekends and days off with the city. And it was a wonderful project, and it's a great attraction that we have for the city. So those are the other things that I had.
Wasn't he like talking about putting medallions, say, in front of Little Brown Church that says?
I think they were both. Yeah, I agree. I think there's both.
San Francisco actually has it in this where it says like, here's the medallion, and there's like a little arrow saying point left, or point right, or there might even be, and then you have a viewer's guide that says this was the house that Jack built. I mean, George Portola slept here or something.
Yes. I think it's like Councilwoman Beer was bringing up the historic district.
Yeah.
Map of the historic.
And it sounds to me like the Historical Society and the Open Space Committee should get together and combine, because the Historical Society has been talking about this also. So it almost sounds like the two should get together and merge their trail maps.
So you got that, right? Yeah, okay. What else? Guiding policy framework. I think we covered it.
Yeah, I don't see anything else that I wanted to talk about or change.
No,
Great job, you guys.
not here
Thank you
either.
so much for all of your hard work. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for going the extra mile, because the original pictures that we had were just square boxes. And when you did the models with the step backs, it made a huge difference in what 55 feet looks like versus a square box building. Huge difference.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. One little thing. One of the people who spoke tonight mentioned about 4 stories and a roof deck. And how the heights correspond to how many stories of housing or whatever we have. So I don't know where in this plan that fits, but I had made a note of that comment. And so in terms of the height being one thing, but how it's broken up, I guess, was the comment that they were making. And I thought it was important to note that.
Well, that also brings up the point. Do we need to allow for a restaurant maybe has a ground floor retail operation, but then they have a deck on the top rooftop to serve food outdoors, so they, whether it's COVID or not COVID, they could have people up on top.
I think that Allison made a reference in her presentation around COVID and the outdoor uses that we've been seeing.
Yeah.
And so I have to say, I think that is kind of here to stay in a certain way. I'm not saying COVID is here to stay. I'm saying the notion of incorporating outdoor spaces and outdoor uses. And I think we've really turned a corner on that. Just my impression, I didn't, I wasn't born and raised here, but
I think the same thing also of having the second story maybe being business and the third story living. I mean, you could conceivably have work, live, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So
you're limiting them again.
What's
Not if it's just an open shell.
You're limiting the people.
Yes, don't limit the people.
No.
Outdoor uses.
The city doesn't develop. Developers, builders build. We don't. So.
All right then. Are we done?
This was very productive. I appreciate everyone's time. Thanks to Diet and Batia. Thanks to Bonnie and Tina and everyone else who put their sweat equity. Thanks to Councilmember Beckmeyer and Beer. I think you guys were on the subcommittee. And I'm sorry to the folks in the neighborhood who may be overwhelmed with some building heights. Hopefully the city benefits and we get what we want.
Oh, view. I mean, people talked about the view ordinance, which there is no view ordinance. And we've gone over that probably 20 times in all the years that I've been working on committees. And we can't have a view ordinance here because it would require people to cut down trees. And there's no way people would cut down trees to save a view or to, because it's the same. You can't say, oh, a house blocks my view or a tree blocks my view. It's exactly the same. So that's why we don't have a view ordinance or a light ordinance, because it would affect trees. I had to bring that in. That was a long time ago. But.
Okay, that's good. I appreciate that. It's a very good comment. Okay, anyone have anything else? No? All right, let's go. Good things. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone, for your time and thoughtful comments. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. It is 8:47. Good night.
Good night.